G'day, this is Simon and Bazza, and we would like to let you know that you're on a bloody awesome show called Apostasy Now with a bloody legend of a bloke called Dragon Beard. Yeah, and you can, I don't know where his website is, but he can fix that up anyway. Yeah, but anyway, take this bloke a listen, have it, download his shows and support him and have a good time at listening.
Welcome back. You've fallen back in with a bad crowd here at Apostasy Now. This week's guest is Justin Vacula. He's been here before, but this time we had him on to talk about something he's very interested in that I hope you find interesting even if you don't adapt it into your own life, which is Stoicism. I think it's something positive that has to offer in terms of how you live your life, how you view the world, as opposed to us always agreeing on what we don't believe in. I'm trying to bring people on with different perspectives and different points of view when I can. And I think he explains it well. He's got more work, so if you find this interesting, I encourage you to follow up with the links that he discusses at the end of the show and in there in our show notes, I'm sure. So welcome back to another episode of Apostasy Now.
Without the darkness, how would we recognize the light? Do not fear your negative thoughts. They are part of you. They are a part of every living being, even Vulcans.
You?
The Vulcan heart was forged out of barbarism and violence. We learned to control it, but it is still part of us. To pretend it does not exist is to create an opportunity for it to escape.
Because I'm very much a skeptic. I'm more of a skeptic than I am an atheist. I mean, atheist is a conclusion based on my skepticism.
So you'd be better if you were straight?
Yes.
Wow.
Anybody would be.
That attitude is what is responsible for the rise of atheism.
That's not what Islam is all about. Islam is peace.
What is the penalty for leaving the Muslim faith?
With the death penalty.
Thank you.
This is Apostasy Now.
For people to get the information correct before they start yapping.
Get ready to root for the bad guys.
Resist it while you still can, and before the right to complain is taken away from you, which will be the next thing.
Yeah, doing pretty well today. Off day on a weekend here. I'll have the conversation with you, and then I'm going to be hosting a discussion group later on the topic of death with dignity. So that should be a nice day.
Death with dignity?
Yeah, talking about rational suicide, death in old age, sort of life worth living.
Okay. How people basically go through weighing all that stuff out and having like a really frank conversation about it?
Right.
Well, heavy stuff.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, it's heavily discussed in the Stoic philosophy literature. As I gave a list of topics to the group organizer, well, what would you like to talk about? And that was picked out of a list of like 8 things. It's the seventh discussion group that I'll be hosting with this group. So, yeah.
Well, listen, when I am not an expert at all about the things that you've been talking about. I've seen some of it, and I've been trying to absorb a little bit about it. But one of the things that I'm getting, one of the things that struck me about what you're talking about, Stoicism, right? That's what it's called.
Mm-hmm. That's right.
One of the things that a lot of people seem to be kind of looking for in the atheist and skeptic communities in particular, the ones I'm aware of, is rather than saying what they're not about, is looking for some kind of a positive way to approach the things that they do.
Right.
You know, something constructive rather than, I guess, just purely destructive or whatever you want to call it.
Right. Yeah, it's a benefit of Stoic philosophy, and it's saying, okay, this is the kind of person we want to be. These are the character traits that we want to embody. This is the way we want to think about things, that we don't need to refer to God or a religious system or anything like that. There's some mention of a creator or some sort of divine providence in the Stoic text, but I don't think that that's necessary to take on some of the better aspects of it or what can work for people.
Yeah. So now, well, can I just ask, starting out, what got you interested in it? How long have you been sort of looking into it and learning about it?
Right. I think it's about 2 years now that I've been reading the text, writing about these issues, creating videos, a combination of those things, as a lot of themes in Stoic philosophy seem to be parallel with cognitive behavioral therapy and rational emotive behavioral therapy, which were some topics that I've studied in grad studies for mental health counseling, and thinking about well, it's the way we think about things, our cognitions, that really has a lot to do with our mental health. And that if we can reframe certain ideas, if we can have more of a detached perspective and try to align our beliefs with reality, that we'll have a more productive life.
Yeah.
Coming after that, actually, is some hearing about Stoicism on the Rationally Speaking podcast with Massimo Pigliucci and Julia Galef at the time. And then another encounter came listening to a podcast about poker, the Thinking Poker podcast, in which they mentioned Epictetus, talking about some applications from his work, his discourses, his handbook, as being helpful for one's poker game. So since that's something that I'm interested in, playing a lot of poker, I said, oh, well, I've heard about this through several sources. So I went out and purchased some books, started reading, and say, wow, this is a really good way to think about poker, think about life, and apply some of the ideas from this text to have a stronger mental game, to have more fortitude and endurance at the table, and thinking about things like acceptance, dealing with change, dealing with the inevitable ups and downs of poker, and even life, that there are going to be some moments where you feel really great and other moments where things won't go the way you want. And this comes under the banner of acceptance and saying, well, yes, life is like that. It's not always going to go the way we want it to be. So what is a response? To simply accept what happens, to endure the best we can, and to have gratitude even for things that are going well. And it's even a quote from the text is that don't talk of things as misfortunes, but rather think of it as good fortune, that you can bravely endure what happens, as a lot is simply outside of our control.
I guess a lot of that falls under simply becoming the general gist of a lot of what you just said is attitude is everything. You can't control the world. I guess Stoicism sounds like it just takes that general idea of attitude is everything and actually forms it into things that you can function with, like actual steps you can take in your mind and in your life.
Right. Yeah, that's a big part of it, and that attitude is a big part, right? There are going to be certain things like genetics, the environment, that, oh, okay, well, maybe we don't have control over everything, and there could be some really traumatic things that, well, no matter what, we can tell ourselves, well, think positive, think positive. Dealing with death and grief, there are some topics that come up, and even the Stoics, especially Seneca, will say, well, actually, it's normal to grieve after the loss of a friend, a family member, but how could we respond to it? Well, we don't want to be at the extreme of grieving the rest of our lives, at least in an extreme way, but we can rather remember the person, right? So it's moderation is another key thing within the Stoic text, and realizing that there are some things about human nature that we can't change, but come to be aware of that. And that will allow us to be stronger and better cope with a lot of the events, as you said, are, yes, outside or largely outside of our control.
Yeah. So now Stoicism, that goes back to ancient Greece. How long, do you remember approximately how long back that goes?
Right. It goes back to ancient Greece and Rome. We're talking about Seneca, who was actually an advisor to Nero. We're talking about, Epictetus around the time of the Academy and Aristotle's schools. So, it's centuries ago, but a lot of the advice is still practical to everyday living today, as it's perennial human concerns. And the practical application, I think, is a big strength of it, as sometimes philosophy gets a bad reputation as being very pie in the sky, or how are we going to use this? What good is philosophy? This poo-poo attitude that people seem to take. But for the Stoics, their philosophy was very much related to everyday living, and they found philosophy as a teacher, as something that you can use to improve your life. And what good is it if you don't go out and apply these principles, is a common theme within the text.
Yeah. So for people who are going to listen to this and don't know anything about it, maybe we could say, speaking of practical application, would you think some of the major practical applications that people would benefit from if they took the opportunity to look into this and possibly adapt it into their life?
Right. There's a lot of talk in the text about desires and expectations, and thinking about what is really worth it, that how are we going to focus our time, our energy, our mental resources, and that there are a lot of things that can give us pleasure, right? We can go ahead and spend a lot of money, spend a lot of time on certain areas in life, but the Stoics warn that outside of moderation, in the extremes, if we crave fame, if we crave wealth, that maybe will compromise our own character and our own lives in the process. that if we're not so introspective about what we're doing, that we're going to end up harming ourselves, maybe losing friends, selling out. There's talk about even food in the text, and to try to have a moderate diet and to just be content with less. And
Wow, we could all really use that in this day and age.
Yeah, with maybe record levels of obesity, heart disease, diabetes. It's really sad. It's on the rise here in America, here throughout the world, right? So talking about moderation and thinking about what do I need to be content instead of looking on the outside for happiness and contentment, the Stoics advise us to look within, to try to be content within ourselves and desiring less and reducing our expectations and being happy, so to say, with what we have, with less, and looking at that as a fulfilled life.
So how do you think this is likely to impact people when it comes to approaching new topics, new information, or even having debates? This kind of a mindset, this kind of a discipline, how do you think it would likely affect someone's outlook or behavior in that regard?
Right. There are a lot of attitudes about humility in the Stoic text, right? To understand that we don't have all the answers, that life is a journey, that there's constant progress that we can make, that we should investigate a lot of sides of a certain issue and seek wisdom from people before us, from many different sources, from many authors, and not be so sure of ourselves and be so stubborn, but rather to open ourselves and to even admit that we've erred a lot in the past and that we've made a lot of advancements. So instead of just sticking to one perspective just because we have it or just because it seems right or it seems good or it feels good, that's not the way to be, right? We're to look to evidence, right? We're to look to reason in forming accurate and careful judgments about the world. The Stoics talk about following nature, and yes, we're going to look at whatever's available to us to make the right decisions, to be careful, to be prudent, and to be humble.
Yeah. I know I could use more of that. I try to have humility, but I'm just so amazing. I'm just thinking when I'm listening to what you're talking about, when I do have occasion, what I often do actually is so if I find something on YouTube and you're having an address, what I do with a lot of stuff is I take YouTube, turn it into an audio format because I'm a truck driver.
Yep.
And I'll be listening to it in audio during the day. And there's a lot of exchange of ideas, but often it goes off the rails with people digging in their heels into like entrenching themselves,
right?
And taking things, I think, personal maybe is the best way of of saying it. I'm not going to say I'm immune to it, but I do understand the value of what I'll tell people often is, if I have not a screaming match, but an argument, a disagreement with someone, as I did actually just not that long ago with a couple of people. And then I'll come back later and say, I think that you had a point about such and such, and I've been thinking a lot about it. And they seem surprised because they figured because we argued, I wouldn't actually consider what they said later on.
Right.
Yeah. I think there's a real shortage of people willing to do that. So now I know you are a skeptic, at least you've been involved in secular concerns, state and church separation.
Right.
Since you started taking on this discipline for your own mindset, how has it affected? Have you noticed it affecting your work at all? Like when you're dealing with these issues and engaging in that way?
Yeah, I think it's important, as you're alluding to consider other sides of the argument and what people have to say, maybe taking more of a detached perspective and not becoming so angry, right? There can be a thing of, we notice that something in the world isn't going the way that we would like, that, society has failed in some way, maybe some people have failed, we didn't get our way, but rather, as I mentioned, taking this attitude of acceptance and understanding that, yes, other people will be difficult. Other people aren't always going to agree with us. So what is the best way to get along in the world like this, rather than taking an attitude and just giving up, rather than just being angry? We hear this theme that, since the person was so righteous in their indignation, or since they were so sure that, whatever they do, that's okay, that's permissible. And that could be a very bad attitude to take, as we're seeing in some of the modern discussions here, that people resort to violence to to react to violence and thinking that, oh, well, we can achieve peace through violence, or some of the headlines that I've been seeing recently. And that if a person is so angry that they're blinded by their anger and they're not willing to take a step back and say, well, maybe we can have other solutions to this issue. Maybe we can do something more constructive rather than destructive. There's a lot of talk about anger in the Stoic texts. This isn't going to be a positive thing that's going to guide us in the right direction. This is going to be a negative emotion that we should work to temper, that we should work to overcome. Maybe we can have some sort of sense of injustice about things, and that can drive us to some sense of justice in our social circles in the community. But anger to a point of just being reckless, not really thinking things through, that's not going to be a helpful thing.
Yeah, it's about trying to spend your energies in a way that's going to be constructive in some way.
Right.
I've been seeing the same thing. There seems to be no desire for one side to understand their opposition. They just want to basically crush them.
Mm-hmm.
And they feel like this will, but when it comes to humans, especially when you've got billions of them on a planet, crushing ideas, it doesn't really work that way. I mean, you can physically assault people. You can even physically intimidate people to the point where they don't show up and speak out. But at some point, those ideas are going to resurface in some form. And it's better to understand why those ideas are motivating people in order to try and deal with them effectively. And I think exactly what you're talking about, being a little bit self-aware and having some of that humility goes a long way.
Right. And even understanding where other people are coming from, even if their ideas are clearly wrong. I mean, maybe a very easy example would be, white nationalism, right? That's a topic in the news this week. And that, okay, well, these people are really wrong about this, that having some sort of white ethno state and declaring certain people to be inferior and blaming the Jews or blaming African American communities for all of the ills in society, right? That's not going to be the way forward. But we'll understand, what is leading them to this perspective, and we can encounter their ideas with ideas of our own rather than resorting to violence or just completely trying to shut these people out and up. I mean, even in other philosophical traditions, the idea of having the bad ideas out in public so that people can actually hear them and say, okay, well, yes, these people do exist, and this is what they're saying, and we can encounter that by saying, okay, this is why they're wrong about this, and these are some ideas that we could put out instead, right?
Another group that perhaps is going to be less of a hot issue would be a good example maybe of understanding and how effective it can be in understanding and engaging that way with your opposition. In Canada, we a couple of times have had very strong separation movements in Quebec. And these people that were really pushing for it, at one point, it was they had a referendum, 49 to 51% was the vote to stay. So 1%, just a little over 1% shift in the voters would have been Quebec separating. Now, I have no idea what that would have looked like, but it obviously would have been an upheaval in this country. And so the approach that was taken in the long term by people who understood a little bit about people in Quebec was they started using government programs to create more jobs, to raise the quality of life. So people would have, as it was put to me, two cars in the driveway or in the garage. And sure enough, over the years, the desire to separate under those conditions, having a good quality of life, being able to speak the language of their choice in their own province, the desire to separate has really dropped off to the point where it's hard for them to even sustain an opposition party that takes that position. Yeah. And that all came from understanding them and trying to work with them on their concerns.
Oh, there you go.
Yeah.
And even here in the United States, there's this talk of trying to label the people on the other side of the political aisle as evil and just lumping the extremists in with everyone else. That, oh, well, you're a Republican. All Republicans are racist. Oh, you're on the left. Oh, well, you want to destroy society. Well, not so. Let's hear the perspectives of these people and where they're coming from. And of course, you're going to have those extremes, but there can also be some common ground on which people can agree and even work together on some of these issues. Yes, listening to people on the other side, finding this common ground, this is going to be something that helps the social fabric. Of course, you're not always going to find that, right, when you have the extreme perspectives, but surely not everyone is on that side.
I think people willing to take the steps that you're talking about self-reflection are probably going to be within the group that I think when certain principles come into play and they create a certain amount of prosperity, after a certain amount of time, people tend to start forgetting how that occurred. like the connection between the principle coming into play and the prosperity, or even just becoming unaware that the prosperity is in effect, that they're prospering from it. And I think that's what's going on when you're describing the fights going on the streets in the United States right now. I think a lot of people have really forgotten about the prosperity and the benefits that have come from, I guess, what they'd call the civil rights movement.
Right.
And now the conflicts that are going on is a process by which, the hard way, I would say, people are going to have to relearn those principles, and how those principles affect their everyday quality of life and the quality of life, surely, for the next generation that will be coming.
Right. There's something to be said within Stoic philosophy, this attitude of gratitude, as I mentioned, for understanding what is going well in your life. And that often we could take that for granted, that we just expect that to happen. Look around. Oh, I'm in an apartment. The temperature is pretty good in here. I'm safe from the weather. I have my bills paid. My utilities are working. I have a bathroom to use. I can cook my own food. There are grocery stores within 10 minutes driving distance. I mean, it's pretty decent. Think centuries ago where that simply wasn't the case, or maybe in other stages of your life, maybe you were homeless. Maybe you really were hungry. Look at the people who are in poverty. And you can think about, well, what are the things that aren't going so well in my life? The Stoics would advise you to take action and try to improve that. And yes, be self-reflective and think, well, what are the problems that are going on? What can I do to change it? The Stoicism doesn't encourage an attitude of total resignation, but rather saying, I have the power to change things in my life, that I can take steps, that I can form goals, I can have a plan of action to improve things, rather than simply complaining or just lamenting the state of life, that let's try to do something to improve things for ourselves and for others around us.
Maybe we'll have to make certain sacrifices of time, money, or environment as a means to an end. While doing so, though, we should not be totally distracted from our goals and remember what we seek to achieve. Being distracted from our goals can lead to failure and missed opportunity. Epictetus writes, "People behave like a traveler who, returning to his own country, comes across a good inn on the road, and because the inn pleases him, remains there. Have you forgotten your intention, man? You are not traveling to this place, but only through it. But this is a fine inn, and how many other fine inns are there, and how many pleasant meadows, but only to be passed through on the way. For you have not, I think, come into this world to pick out the most charming places." So thinking, what are our goals? What do we seek to achieve? There can be many distractions. There can be changes that can lead us off that path that we set for ourselves.
Yeah, absolutely. I don't know if you followed many people from back in the day, but one of the YouTubers that was popular for quite a while, he's still around now, he's come back, is Raymond Wallace. He's gone by a number of names like Snake Slipskin Snee or something.
Okay.
He used to wear a patch, and then it turned out that he was making it up the whole time. He didn't need the patch. And anyways, this guy you were just talking about, the reason he came to mind is you're talking about being homeless and being grateful now. He was always very intelligent. I always enjoyed listening to him talk, but he had a very unsettled side to him. He was very unstable, I think, in a number of ways. And eventually, a lot of this you can kind of see if you've watched him over the years, like I have, you can kind of watch it happening. He started getting into drinking and drugs, eventually became homeless, got arrested. And when he hit rock bottom, some people helped him out a little bit. He ended up going to Europe for a while, and now he's come back and he's seen therapists of some type that told him that he's doing a lot better, and he started making videos again about largely, not just his point of view on things, but largely what you're talking about, gratitude. Like, I've been surprised how much he talks about gratitude now and not taking things for granted.
Right. Yeah, and that could lead in many situations, right? They get a new job, it seems to be going great. Maybe there's that initial period of novelty, but then after a while, well, people just get upset about things. They're not happy. Oh, I want this to improve. I want that to improve. But to understand that, well, that novelty fades away, right? That maybe in the beginning, it seems really great, such a great experience. Oh, look what I have. And then people just kind of accept that as the norm instead of just being happy with what they have. And surely, yes, there's a case to improve. Maybe you can work toward a promotion at work, maybe negotiate higher pay, things like that, right? You don't always want to be in the same station in many cases. But yes, just having appreciation for what happens, or even in relationships and friendships, maybe we just take that for granted. We don't keep in touch with people we know and value. We don't really seek their advice. We don't reach out. And some people just let that go over time, but it can take work to maintain and value those. And it's another theme in the Stoic philosophy text as well, in that change is inevitable, that it's going to happen, that people come and go, that maybe illness will befall us, that maybe different circumstances in life will change. So to value the present moment and to be appreciative of that is something that can be very helpful as well.
Yeah. Now I was thinking in my head, thanks a lot. Now I'm thinking in my head about people I maybe haven't kept contact with like I should.
Right. So there's a practical application there, right?
That's right.
And to be careful too of who we actually choose as friends and who we let into our social circle. And sometimes what happens is, well, we see, oh, someone was nice to us, or, oh, we had this thing in common with a person, but are we really careful of how we spend our time, who we spend our time with, and what kind of values do we have this screening process for other people, right? If we're going to put time into a friendship, into a relationship, but that's not reciprocated, well, is that the position we want to find ourselves in? If we happen to become friends with someone, but their character is really questionable, right? They have issues with honesty, consistency, maybe they're lying about some things in their life. Well, is that a friendship we want to maintain? Maybe looking for people with similar values, people we can trust. And Seneca talks about this a lot in his letters from a Stoic, to carefully consider people who we let inside of our social circle. But once we do, and once they're trusted individuals who match our values, then we can open up and really engage and be enthusiastic in that friendship.
Yeah. See, a lot of the stuff that you talk about with this really, it's stuff that I think it's more developed than I've had in my life, but it's stuff that on some level I have seen the value of. I remember years ago in university, so I'm talking now like 17 years ago or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
So somehow I got included in a group email thing with my brother and his friends. Then they were a few years younger than me, so they were just becoming adults at the time. But they were old enough that they were having this infighting between a couple of them. Particularly, my brother had been when they were in high school. He had been kind of the leader of their group. And now they're getting a little bit older, and there was one guy in particular who was really going after him, I think challenging him in some instinctual sense for that kind of leadership role in the group.
Right.
Anyways, it turned really ugly, and I got tired of seeing all these emails that I wasn't really directly involved in, but I knew all the people that were. So I wrote an email. It's the only email I've ever written that actually had, like, it was written formally with an actual heading in it. It's called Character. And I went through, and I started talking not just about the guy who was causing the problems for my brother, but I was talking about every other person who had been silent on this issue, telling him to knock it off. They just hadn't said anything. And how these types of traits will, if you don't take note of them and change them now, they will follow you your entire life. And that is the difference between, an incident and the idea of character. Like, why are you the person you are? How has this played into your reactions and the situations that you're in? And I think people underestimate the importance of looking at character.
Right. Have they really thought about it? How are they going to apply principles, or are they even aware that they're following certain principles? Do they even have a guide with which to live their lives, right? You talk about the atheist and secular communities, and one thing you mentioned earlier was, well, do we have a positive identity to rally behind? What do we have to offer? And that some people will just maybe reject certain religious systems or religious ideas, but what are they going to put forward? And from some groups, we do indeed see that and saying, well, this is the kind of society we want. We have things like the Humanist Manifesto from the AHA, the American Humanist Association, right?
Yeah.
But in philosophy, rather than rejecting it and saying, okay, well, these are the character traits that we think are important. This is how we want to live our lives. This is an example we can show to others, having a positive identity, right?
Well, and I think that, okay, well, I'll come at this from another angle too. When you're talking about character and you're talking about people in your life, I think people sometimes, once you know someone, unless you become enraged with them, if somebody's been murdered or whatever, if it's a really huge blow up, then it's different. But I think once some people get to know someone, they feel like they can't distance themselves from that person, regardless of the course of the other person's life. I don't do it all the time, but there have been a couple times in my life where someone that I know, once they seem to blossom into a different type of character that is, I find, really toxic and doesn't show any sign that this is just an abnormality. And I guess in some way personally affects me, I will distance myself from that person. And I don't think that's immoral. I think some people feel guilty about doing that. And I've actually been lectured about it by a couple of common friends when I have done
Oh,
it.
wow.
Yeah. But, I mean, this wasn't a case where someone, like I say, they didn't attack me with a chair or something. It was just,
Right.
it was, I won't get into it, but at a time when I was experiencing personal abuse in my life, this person was actually doing really well and decided to take that opportunity to condemn me publicly over minor issues and then stop talking to me for years. And then later was wondering why I wouldn't reopen communication with them.
Oh, I see.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's an argument that within friendship, it can provide that secure place in which people can talk openly about their concerns. So if we're to have some sort of character flaw, we should have a humble attitude and be willing to hear what other people have to say. And sometimes we can overlook things about ourselves, right? That maybe a certain way we approached a certain social situation might not have been the best way to do things, that maybe we could have done better. We could have used different words, maybe our tone of voice, who knows? I mean, maybe we thought we handled it well, but we would appreciate someone else saying that, right? So in a friendship, if you say you knew someone who maybe developed this negative character, then maybe there could have been an argument for talking about that and addressing that with the person. And similarly, being open to that sort of feedback from friends, understanding that people have good intentions rather than just dismissing their approach and being open to that sort of feedback. But over time, if the person is unrepentant, if they continue with the same behaviors, then yes, there could be that argument for distancing and thinking about, well, what positive is this going to bring to my life if I'm around this person who keeps displaying this sort of toxic behavior? Maybe that will rub off on me as well, and I'll develop some of those traits. And well, do I really want to represent myself as this person being a good friend if they're going to treat others poorly, for instance? Maybe people have ideas about sunken costs or time, or they have some sort of optimism that, oh, well, they'll get better, even though that's not the case, right? People can stay in failed relationships for quite a while and they become quite unhappy with that. Maybe they'll make excuses for the behavior, or they'll say, oh, well, there are one or two things that are actually going well, but then there's this litany of things that aren't, right? You hear this, oh, he's only like that when he's drinking, or, oh, she only gets like that when she's upset. That's not their real character, right? We hear some of these things, but yeah, shouldn't we be looking for better connections and better relationships with others and not be guilted by others? Oh, well, you should stay with so-and-so, or this person, yeah, oh, you left them. Oh, you're such a bad person for doing that, right? We have to have some sort of boundaries and realize that we have our own worth and time rather than just accepting anyone who comes along and just tolerating any kind of behavior, even if it's destructive.
I think maybe a mistake that a lot of people make is that they, in this particular case, maybe common friends thought that maybe it was an issue of anger. Well, not anger. There was some anger involved. Maybe they thought it was hatred or retribution, that this is my form of retribution and cutting them off. But it's not about that. I guess my perspective was that, from common friends that I trust, this kind of character issue had developed very solidly for years while the communication had cut off from their end. And I guess the way I thought of it was I'm only alive for so long. I only have so much time. And there's a lot of people I can spend my time with. This is just not someone I want to do that with anymore. I don't understand why I would want to try and crawl back over that hurdle and hope that they would change when there are other people that I can spend time with right now productively, meaningfully.
Right. And within Stoic philosophy, there's this talk of life just being a short affair, right? The time passes us by so fast, and to be critical of how we spend that time and what we're doing. How do we want to live our life? Is this really worth doing? Think of just maybe the wasted time, so to say, or time where people just aren't really doing things that are productive, or people who are saying that they want to do certain things, but they never quite get around to it. Well, have they organized their schedule? Are you spending time with people you don't want to spend time with, and you're just going through the routine, you're going through the habits? Well, the text encourage you to think about those habits and think about how you're spending your time to use it well and to get rid of bad habits and replace them with good behaviors and things that you actually want to do, right?
Here, I'll tell you another little story. This one's a little bit more darkly amusing.
All right.
So when I was, before university, I was asked to help out at the church. I don't know what was going on with the Sunday school teachers or whatever, but this would have been high school students that I had for the day. And now I would have been like 20, so you can imagine how many adults were not taking their role seriously in this church if I was in charge for it. That was the second time they just at the last moment threw me this Sunday school class. So I got everyone packed up in my car and a couple other cars from young people that were old enough to drive. And I got everyone, we drove down to the local cemetery, and I had them, I had them wander around in the cemetery for a while and then come back. And I made the point that each and every single gravestone that they saw was a person who had dreams, a life with desires and hopes and plans.
Mm-hmm.
And that even though we're all young at this stage, we feel invincible. There's only so much time, and we don't know when it's going to be cut off. And it's good to every now and then think about whether you are doing with your life what you really think is important. And even though it seems morbid, years later, at different times, a number of those young people actually said that made a real impact on them.
Oh, that's great. Yeah, think of all the people in older age who say, oh, life has passed me by. I never had the opportunity to do this. Oh, I wish I could have done things differently. Right. I'm sure these sentiments are quite common. So that's actually, a good thing to understand that, yes, well, death might happen. Maybe it's tomorrow. Who knows? We lack control over a lot of that. Right. And it could also motivate us to live a healthier kind of life, too. Yeah. And just having a better diet and just taking care of ourselves and not just letting things go, not letting things pass by, to not have this moment of, oh, it's too late, or, oh, I missed the opportunity to do this and that. And certainly there'll be some restrictions on us, but we can still make a good effort to take control of our own lives and live the kind of life that we want to live. Yeah.
So you said you had a list of topics. When you usually address people about this that don't know much about it, do you have like a few areas that are going to be important to talk about, introduce them to?
Yeah, that's right. I've been hosting discussion groups in the Greater Philadelphia area with a humanist group, the Humanist Association of Greater Philadelphia, and each month we talk about a different topic. This month's discussion will be on the topic of death with dignity and arguments for rational suicide, that perhaps later in life, certain medical conditions, certain chronic conditions are going to drastically take away from a good life, a life that is worth living. So we're going to think, well, what do we want our lives to be like? Are there cases which we should end our life, or should we just go on living in excruciating suffering when things don't seem to be changing for the better? So we're going to talk about this. We talked also about, let's see here. We talked about the topics of overcoming adversity, welcoming challenge, and trying to accept the challenges that happen, to accept some of the harder spots in life and looking for opportunities to overcome that, then rather than being in a state of resignation and giving up and maybe just cutting ourselves off and staying at home and not rising to the challenge and thinking that life is so difficult, and maybe even ending up in a clinically depressive state.
That was just going
to anxiety, right?
That was exactly what came to my mind right away, is how many people are depressed now, and the solution that they get is, here, take these pills. Mm-hmm. If they're lucky, they'll get cognitive therapy, someone they can talk to in counseling. But exactly, maybe this is my experience. Most people that are depressed seem to really need to A, connect to people, and B, deal with what is getting them down, like what on some level is really dragging you down.
Right, to really face that and to try to get at the root of the problem and not view certain things as catastrophes or failures, but rather maybe opportunities to improve, and having a state of radical acceptance. It's a simple song lyric by the UK rock group Anathema, a song, A Natural Disaster. It says, no matter what I do, no matter what I say, I can't change what happened. I can't change what happened. So this idea that the past has passed and we can accept that certain things have happened. So what are we going to do now? Well, we could take action. We can work to be better from that experience. And certainly there can be states of intense trauma, right? For instance, people in the military seeing friends, comrades die in battle. So post-traumatic stress disorder is a thing, right? So it won't always be easy, but we can still take steps to improve and try to confront that which has happened and try to live a good life and get past that as best as we could.
Yeah, absolutely. I follow a lot of people I don't agree with on many different things, but I'll follow them because they have something they're really good at, and I find it fascinating. And there's a doctor named Alan Francis, a psychiatrist, and he talks about how we're over-medicating, particularly children and seniors. But my main concern, even though he has said that we don't actually know what it's doing to their developing brains, setting that aside, I've watched even my own nephews being medicated heavily to the point where it's almost like they're drooling at night. How are children that are being treated this way going to grow up into adults where we already have this problem that people don't want to question what's getting them down or what their major problems are in life? They're going to grow up into adults and they've never developed those skills at all. I'm really worried about that.
Yeah, it's a worrying thing as maybe people see it as the quick fix. Oh, take this medication. Oh, this will help everything. But that's not really the case, right? Maybe you can combine medication with talk therapy and counseling, but maybe people see, oh, well, this is just a simple thing to do. Maybe parents just looking for an easy fix when that really won't help things. And in some cases, it can make it worse, especially if people are quickly jumping to a conclusion about things and saying, oh, well, this kid has ADD, ADHD. And well, actually, maybe they're a young boy who's really active or right. Maybe that's the case. It could be a combination of those things, right? But we're looking for maybe positive ways to deal with it in a realistic thing and just taking it slowly and looking on how to improve certain conditions, right? There's a case for medication, right? But combining that with therapy or not going too quickly into it, well, that seems to be a better way to do that.
Well, a key feature of what you're talking about with Stoicism is personal responsibility to yourself.
Right.
This is how much more sense does this make to help people find ways to develop their own sense of self-responsibility? And as I have told people, even my own daughter, who's still quite young, I have told her that I teach her responsibility because there's no other way to find empowerment in life than to take responsibility.
Mm-hmm.
That's just not a lesson that's out there, but it makes so much more sense to go, listen, here are some ways that you need to challenge yourself and think about things. And then each of you can change your own life instead of from the top-down approach going, okay, what's the solution for all of these people at once?
Right. Or blaming or complaining or saying, oh, well, it's this system in the world. It's these government officials. It's this, it's that. Oh, I haven't been given this sort of opportunity. Or, oh, other people have it so much better than me. Well, we can accept that, right? And maybe it is the case that, okay, well, maybe there aren't as many opportunities as we would like. Okay, maybe we weren't born with that silver spoon, that our parents weren't rich. We don't have this big inheritance. Okay, so what can we do about that? How are we going to go forward and make lives better for ourselves and improve communities around us even, and taking action to do that rather than just complaining or being destructive, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Hello everyone, Justin Vacula here with another episode of my Stoic Philosophy series. Today's episode is titled Overcoming Adversity and Welcoming Challenge. Visit my website at justinvacula.com, where you can find links to my social media portals and see past Stoic Philosophy content on YouTube, SoundCloud, and Stitcher. My Stoic Philosophy series explores the philosophical tradition of Stoicism with goals to inform, empower, and help others benefit from the practical wisdom of ancient Greek, Roman, and modern thinkers. I tackle many topics including handling adversity, finding meaning in life, working toward contentment, dealing with change, anger, and gratitude. How are we to view challenges which are present in our lives? Should we take steps to avoid adversity and live a life with little challenge or risk, perhaps taking what might be a less bumpy road, although having relatively little payoff? Sometimes, no matter what steps we may take, challenge approaches. How might we be prepared? How will things change when the going gets tough, when the unexpected happens? Stoic writers such as Seneca include many passages in their works in themes of welcoming challenge, a bring-it-on attitude, by which we can face challenge, remain steadfast to the best of our abilities, and focus on what is in our control. With a solid mindset gained through reflections on Stoic philosophy and applications of Stoic teachings, taking action so that we can apply what we learn, we can better face that which poses an obstacle and even embrace challenges that aren't overwhelming.
Maybe you've heard this before, but a lot of the stuff that you talk about, even though it's taken to obviously a fictional extreme, reminds me quite a bit of Spock when I was growing up, and the way that the Vulcans would talk about self-discipline of the mind and not being governed by your emotions. Now, obviously, I don't think that Stoicism takes it to the point where you're supposed to self-suppress your emotions. I think
Right.
that's
Yeah, you're right. There is often there is that thing of saying, "Oh, well, let's just throw emotions away and ignore them." Well, the Stoicism says, "No, let's actually reflect on them and
yes,
understand which emotions can be constructive, which emotions can be destructive." As I was mentioned, anger, it could be a very destructive thing, right? Especially in its extreme states. But there can be many positive emotions as well, as feeling a sort of connectedness with others and
yeah,
senses of joy, senses of wonder that we can experience. These can be positive things. But again, this attitude of moderation is really important, that if we're just so happy with a certain person or a certain thing, maybe we can overlook certain things that aren't going so well and make excuses for that, right? There can always be extremes with something. So it's advocating for a more balanced perspective, right? And just not being so sure about things and hanging that question mark and just going about life in a careful manner.
Are you sure that the actual solution isn't just deplatforming people you don't like?
Yeah. Right. There's been a lot of that, unfortunately, and from what I remember, at least in atheist and secular circles, there would be certain speakers that we wouldn't like. There were some of these themes of creationists going about on college campuses, handing out literature or certain introductions to the origin of species, right? But at the time, people's response to that, as far as I can remember, was, okay, well, this is why this person's wrong. Or, oh, let's go ahead and set up another event in response to what is going on. Or let's have a science instructor talk about evolution. Let's have this different program rather than these protests and screaming at people, pulling fire alarms, shutting things down, right? There's been quite a change in that, and we're so quick to just vilify other people because they happen to disagree with us when they might not be villains after all. Maybe they have some ideas to present. And even if they happen to be these trolls and they don't really have many positive things to contribute, well, is pulling fire alarms and calling for violence and just being nasty, is that the way to respond? I don't think so.
Right. Well, a lot of times when people get exacerbated, or what do you call it? Not exacerbated. When they just get to the end of their rope, they feel like they don't know what to do. The attitude becomes, well, the other people did such and such, so why don't we do it back?
Yeah.
And that attitude's so self-defeating. It's like, well, if the people that you're opposing are willing to do something, and you can clearly see that it's lowering them in some way to do it, then why would you want to lower yourself? Like, you don't do it because whether they're doing it or not. You don't do it yourself because it's something that you know is going to lower your own standards.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's a disturbing trend today that just keeps happening, right? So maybe people can, have more constructive responses to what people are saying, or even take the time and actually sit down in the auditorium and listen to what they have to say. And it could be easy, right? We see something on the internet, oh, this person is this and that, they're racist, they're sexist, blah, 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 right? But maybe that's not really the case. Maybe they actually have some sort of worthwhile perspectives, even if you happen to disagree with them. I mean, Jordan Peterson has been someone that I've been following for several months, and I found his content extremely valuable, not just his case about gender pronouns, but rather his lectures on psychology and philosophy. And depending on who you read on the internet, people will just write him off as a bigot. And wow, what they have lost by doing that and not actually listening. Someone will just spread this insult, spread this idea, and not look to what the person has to say. But there's actually a lot out there, and let's consider different perspectives and how can we really be worse for that, right? Maybe if we encounter perspectives we disagree with, we can understand, okay, well, how can I respond to this objection, right? I've heard of this a lot when I've talked in churches, as I've had debates and discussions with pastors. I heard this a lot from religious individuals. Oh, I haven't really considered what you had to say before. That was a really thoughtful thing that you've had to say. And similarly, when hearing some perspectives from religious individuals, I would think, oh, well, maybe this is a better way to look at this issue, or, oh, I understand where these people are coming from here, that, oh, maybe we could look at this as a metaphorical story rather than just writing it off in this more literalist interpretation, right? We can learn things about other people and their perspectives, their motivations, and we'll probably be better for that.
Even from, if you're going to have a debate with people, even from a strategic point of view, Aren't you going to be more effective if you understand their actual arguments and their perspectives rather than just assuming them and then, throwing basically everything you have at them? Oh, no.
Right.
Was it Sun Tzu even lectured about this? Knowing your enemy, you should be winning.
Right.
You should win your battle before you ever set foot on the battlefield, essentially.
Yeah, being charitable toward other people as well, and yeah, it can really help us at the end of the day.
Yeah, I remember even I've mentioned this on the show before. Bill, who organized Imagine No Religion, even when he had Michael Shermer, we won't even go with Thunderfoot. There was a boycott being organized over him. But even just Michael Shermer, there were people that were trying to create problems that he was going to be a speaker. It's I'm sure you're familiar with Michael Shermer.
Right.
He's not really somebody who goes out of his way to upset people. He's not a fire and brimstone type of guy. So people, I think they want to go to their comfort zone in their, I guess that's one of the things that's I'm hoping people will pick up on this is the difference between what you're talking about here in a very, I think, prescient way is the difference between group identity and individual responsibility or self-empowerment. Because right now, people just seem to be willing to give up so much of their own personal power for a sense of belonging in a larger group that it's just gotten too far. It's out of whack.
Right. Rather looking for identities and smaller groups or certain labels, maybe it can even be helpful to just think of ourselves, as the Stoics say, of citizens of the world, right? If you're asked, well, do you hail from Greece? No, I am a citizen of the universe, and just looking to learn something from different perspectives, different cultures, and to really immerse yourself rather than just shutting yourself out from others' ideas, other perspectives, different cultures, right? That we can be cosmopolitan in this sense, right? And just understanding all kinds of different things about, and even if we happen to disagree, well, yes, as you said, we can be better equipped to encounter some of these objections and understand where people are coming from. So that can be really helpful for us.
So what are some of the major misunderstandings you think people have about Stoicism as you go around and people talk to you about it?
Right. Well, we touched on this a little bit, that it's just a sense of giving up. And some people can say, oh, well, if you're going to have so much gratitude, if you're going to be so accepting of things, then you're not actually going to try to change things, that you're just going to just stay with the status quo. But that's not the case, right? The Stoics encourage people to get active in their community, to pursue a sort of social good, to challenge people, even in politics, even to speak out against the system and to say, well, this is the kind of life we want to live, to try to help our communities, doing some sort of social good. And so being a role model in a certain case can be very helpful. And just talking to people and saying, we could do little things to try to even improve communities around us, just asking someone how their day was, trying to understand a perspective, right? Just being nice to others and just having this idea of, yes, this is someone I would want to be around myself. I'll emulate some of these principles in action. And that can be really nice to people. Just going to people who have their jobs, maybe people would be complaining and ask them a question of, oh, what's going on, and just hearing someone out, and people can be very happy. You can make a slight difference from that. So no, we're not this detached person who just doesn't care about anything or just wants to resign altogether. Well, we can have a sense of acceptance, right? But we can still work to change things that we might not like, but at some point we can understand that we lack control, and that's really important, right? Is if we're going to continue to try to change certain things that won't be changed, right? I mean, for instance, I'm probably not going to be a world-class Olympic swimmer, right? I'm not going to be able to be in the NBA, right? These are easy examples, but to understand your own skills, your own strengths, and be able to apply those and saying, oh, well, I have these skills, I have these talents, this is what I'm good at, this is how I can contribute, and to be happy about that, right? And not wanting more and more and more. You want more and more, you're never going to get that. You're never going to be satisfied. You're going to keep on looking and keep on looking. So yes, some sense of improvement, but also a sense of acceptance is important as well. Self-recognition.
So maybe the acceptance, and this Stoicism won't be alone in this, but maybe the acceptance element of it is being misconstrued as passivity.
Right.
I know, for instance, people who believe in nonviolence as a form of activism, political activism, are often called pacifists, and they take exception to it if they're educated in their movement. that there's simply no word for nonviolent. So that's why they use that word. But nonviolent, as opposed to passive, is supposed to be that you're still active, you just don't use violence.
Right. Yeah, a different approach to do things rather than, as you said, yes, encountering people with their own tactics, countering violence with violence. Well, there can be an argument for self-defense, sure, but maybe we can let the proper authorities do that. Maybe we can take a different approach and, yes, understanding our own skills and what we can be good at. So yeah, that's one misconception there. There's also some misconception that talk about, oh, well, Stoicism is just a philosophy for the elite, that, oh, well, you have certain things in order, but other people don't, and oh, you're privileged for that. And what about the people who are really poor? What about people who don't have certain opportunities in life? Well, Epictetus was actually a slave, and he was talking about how, with his disability, I believe he had sort of his leg amputated or removed in some way, that he can still thrive in life, that he had the capacity to live, the capacity to flourish, and this idea of this inner contentment and simply desiring less and putting forth these positive principles. And he was a teacher, so he used his own skills in his own way to benefit others, to benefit himself, and to have a life worth living, to ask questions, to critically analyze others' motivations. So it's an understanding that in different stations of life, we can still thrive, we can still prosper, that it could be a very empowering philosophy.
So for like a practical application of stuff that people talk about right now, I know there's a lot of what we could call battle of the sexes taken to a whole new level. Mm-hmm. There are certain positions that are put forward and they're read with they're not just accepted with hostility or met with hostility, but they're read in the most negative possible interpretation anymore. So there's always this crossing between discussions about biology when it comes to men and women versus what maybe we could call gender roles within society. Right. And I'm going beyond the transgender issue here. I'm talking about including stuff like whether someone who says, it's a man's world, like men could do such and such, but women can't. There's this, how do I put this? There's this, okay, I'll put it this way again with a personal story. When I was engaged and I ended up marrying her, but we had a child. So when the child was on the way, previous to that, my girlfriend, later would be wife, surprised me. She had always been, I don't shave my legs, rah, 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 I'm a feminist, right? When the baby was on the way, not long into the pregnancy, she surprised me by saying, would you mind if I was a stay-at-home mom and you go out to work? And I was fine with it, but it was surprising to me because up to that point in my life, I had just assumed that was old-fashioned and that the new generations wouldn't feel that way.
Right.
And I have found actually that these are very strong genetic motivators within the sexes of different roles that tend, like with this tendency that we tend to do. It's not absolute. But to even suggest this sort of thing now is considered by a lot of people to be like social heresy.
Right. And in a case of people just not being charitable, well, maybe the woman views that as a form of her own empowerment, that's what she wants to do in life. That's the decision that she's making. She is exercising her own autonomy. And you hear this in the case of the workplace as well, where there are pushes, oh, we want to see more women in this field, that field, or, oh, they're underrepresented, so therefore it must be sexism, it must be patriarchy, it must be that. But is that really the case, right? Can there be other factors that explain this? Maybe it's the case that certain people are just interested in different things, right? You see a lack of men in nursing and education, right? Maybe men just aren't as interested in helping professions compared to women. Maybe that's a biological thing. Maybe there's an element of culture as well, right? There are a lot of explanations for this. We can look into the matter rather than just simply writing it off as, oh, well, sexism against men, that's why they're not in nursing or education. Maybe there's an element of that, for instance, but maybe it's just a more complicated picture. So actually taking a step back and rather than just buying into a certain narrative or explanatory model, just looking at different perspectives that people have to share in that. And if you're a guy and you want to be an elementary school teacher, well, go ahead and do that. Make the steps to do that. If that's something you really want to do, you think your skills align with that, then okay, well, maybe it won't be the easiest profession to get into, or maybe you won't find yourself as comfortable in that environment. But if it's something you really want to do, well, take the effort to do that. I mean, this issue of women in technology, I know a personal friend who's organized a camp for young girls to learn more about STEM and technology, right? Science, technology, engineering, and math. And this is actually an effort to get more women, more girls interested in this. For girls that are already interested in technology, well, this is a positive thing to get more girls involved. So this is taking some positive measures to try to change this, try to have some more representation.
Yeah. Yeah, the interesting, using it from a point of view of positive incentive and interest is great. But I think, yeah, what we're talking about here specifically, what I like is Stoicism. If I have a room full of different types of people, I'm pretty sure from what you're describing, the Stoics in the room would be willing to say, let's have a conversation, let's hear what the different sides have to say, and then we'll weigh it out.
Right.
As crazy as that sounds.
Right. Rather than just casting people as moral monsters or shutting people out of the discussion, or just dismissing people, right? That's not going to be the way to go about things. So that's a practical application there, right? Just being reflective about things and questioning and even some beliefs that we hold and saying, well, maybe I could be wrong about this as well. And looking back at our life and thinking about certain positions that we've changed, and maybe have we really thought things through, or maybe we're just doing this because it's the way it's always been done, or that's because what our parents did, or our friends happen to align in this political camp or with this political perspective, right? That maybe just take a second and question that.
I don't know what it's like for you, but I think I might be doomed to be a personality type that goes through life changing some of my point of views in a way that upset people around me every so often. This seems to keep happening. I'll change and people get upset, and then people kind of get used to it, and then they accept it. And actually, I track certain people who like those views, and then after a number of years, I'll change some more views, and everyone gets upset again.
Well, as long as it's not too often, hopefully that can be a sense of progress and thinking, oh, well, now I'm closer to the truth, and understanding and admitting that, oh, well, actually, there was something I overlooked there, so now I'm going to change this position, right? We don't want to be too willy-nilly either.
Yeah, that's right.
In that, well, yeah, just changing perspectives on the whim. I mean, there was one such example. There was a pride festival. There were some religious protesters, and this guy had a sign up that said, "I used to be gay." Like, well, what's that all about? So like, is that a realistic thing? Or just some really dramatic shifts that we take. So that could be an extreme of that, or maybe going from one political camp to the other and changing and changing and changing. Or there can be some case where people go from one religion to the other. Maybe they're just trying to have that experience and see what each has to offer. But if we're too flaccid, if we're moving too much, then that could be a bad thing too, because then maybe we're just not considering the issues enough to make this dramatic change overnight. And that's something to consider in these conversations. Some people might get frustrated when talking to people from different perspectives, and that, oh, well, the person's not going to change. Well, we can't expect that either, right? If people are going to have some sincerely held beliefs that they often tie to their identity, then that's not going to be, or probably won't be, something that will happen overnight. That will probably be a long process of change. So,
well, and again, that's something that sounds like it's a strong suit of what you're describing with Stoicism, is as opposed to just changing. Maybe what you're talking about is just changing your emotions or your conclusions, like your final conclusions. Challenging yourself, being self-reflective about what your principles are. I think that's what I'm describing for myself. Hopefully, most people, right, that's what they experience more often than what we're talking about there earlier, is that if you go through and you realize that these principles you have either need some alteration, not willy-nilly, like you say, but over the long term, they seem to fall short. Or for me, I think often what happens is I shore up my understanding of my own principles and why they're important. And then eventually they come into play about stuff that I hadn't considered maybe seriously for years. And I realize that now I have to reflect on those things very differently. Mm-hmm. Because I have a different set of principles that I'm aware of.
Right. And isn't it a wonderful thing today with the internet, how we can just have access to so much information? But of course, that can be a problem as well, as there's a lot of bad information that's out there. So we have to be careful in what we're taking in, right? To be responsible consumers of information. As
It is tough. There's a lot
astray.
of it. There is a lot of information now. It's really it used to be the problem was not enough information, and now the real problem is about trying to sort through it effectively.
Right.
All right, so I've had you for about an hour. Is there anything else that you would like to leave people thinking about in terms of trying to convey something to interest them in what you've been talking to people about? And then we'll get into where they can find your work.
Yeah, if people want to learn more about Stoicism, I would recommend Massimo Pigliucci's blog. It's howtobestoic.wordpress.com. There's also a Facebook page. It's Stoic Philosophy group that you can find. And on YouTube, there are just so many resources where you can search for Stoic philosophy and hear all sorts of different speakers, as there seems to be a modern renaissance in Stoicism. A lot of different speakers, from clinicians to philosophy professors, from people in all sorts of walks of life, and Stoicon, different conferences and events that pop up. So you can find that a lot. There's also modernstoicism.com, where people can find different essays, different interviews, videos about Stoicism.
Awesome. So this is, like you say, it's experiencing almost like a renaissance. That's our
right.
That's awesome.
Yeah, and upcoming, it's 54 days, at least at the time of this recording, on August 20th, to Stoicon 2017. It's in Holiday Inn, Toronto, Yorkdale is this year's venue.
Oh, wow. Right in Toronto.
Uh-huh.
That's only a couple hours from me.
All right, well, maybe you'll consider attending. You can see on modernstoicism.com. That event is coming up along with Stoic Week in October. Yeah.
Alrighty, well, I'll make sure to listen back through this and try to get all of these down in the show notes as well, if people want to go there just to click on them.
Mm-hmm. I can share where people can find my content as well.
Yes, do that.
Yep, you can go to my website at justinvacula.com. That's V as in Victor, ACULA at justinvacula.com. You can find me on Facebook, Twitter, YouTube, SoundCloud, iTunes, Instagram, Stitcher, a lot of different venues in which you can find my content. I upload weekly podcasts. Some of them include discussions, interviews with different people, or I'll just upload podcasts of my own talking about many of the issues we've talked about today. I'm also on patreon.com, where I have a page and offer certain rewards to supporters.
Awesome. What I was going to say is thank you not just for being on the show. Thank you for continuing to I don't know, you don't have to put yourself out there and talk about these issues. And I really appreciate the fact that you do.
Yeah, thanks for your time today, and thanks for having me on the show.
You speak in riddles because the truth frightens you.
You're right. It does frighten me. You were surprised to hear a Vulcan master admit to having emotions?
Yes.
Emotions can be a powerful tool. To deny their existence is illogical, but you must learn to control them.
Why?
Do you wish to be taught?
I would question everything you say.
You would not be a worthy pupil otherwise. Let us begin.